Hello and welcome to Horizons of Hope. And this is a podcast that's designed to help us deepen ourselves spiritually and also think about ways in which we can do mission during this lockdown period and beyond. And I'm really pleased today to have Dr. Anna Ruddick with us. Anna is a community theologian and researcher who helps churches and Christian organisations reflect on how to deepen and strengthen their relationships with their local community. And our church has been a great beneficiary of this. She holds a doctorate in practical theology, and she's a core team member for Urban Life, which is a community engagement organisation. And she's a community engagement associate for livability, a research fellow at Bristol Baptist College, and a trustee of the William Temple Foundation. And all that makes me feel out of breath. Her first book, Reimagining Mission from Urban Places, was recently published by SCM. Well, Anna, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you with us. And congratulations on the book. I thought it was really brilliant and it's come out just the right time.
Thank you.
Can you tell us about the circumstances that led you to write the book?
Sure, yeah. Thank you very much for having me as part of this conversation today. So the book has really come about because of my doctoral research. So the question really is, why did I do a doctorate? And that's probably a very sensible question. The short story is that at the time I was working for the Eden Network, which is a mission organisation that recruits Christians to relocate into urban communities in partnership with local churches. And team members move in, live there for the long term, and they seek to get involved in their neighbourhoods in lots of different ways. And I was also living in an urban neighbourhood myself whilst working for Eden, and I had a lot of questions about what we were doing, about how we understood God at work in what we were doing. We talked a lot about wanting to see transformation in people's lives, but it sometimes felt like the kinds of change that we were seeing didn't match up to our expectations of what we meant when we talked about transformation. And so sometimes team members would kind of raise concerns that maybe, are we doing this right? You know, what's really going on here? And so I really wanted to try and find out a little bit more about what we were doing and a little bit more about what God was doing in our activity, if you like. So yeah, that's how the research came about, and it involved interviewing Eden team members and urban community members, and I was really interested in both sides of that experience. What were they learning from each other? What were their interactions with each other like? How did the whole kind of picture come together to show us something of who God is and what mission is?
Yeah, it was fascinating to follow the story and see how their thinking developed. And I love this concept of mission as pastoral care. Can you explain that a bit more to us?
Yeah, sure. So these Christians who joined the Eden Network, they kind of started with the idea that they would move in, that they get involved with their local communities, do their best to be good neighbours, and maybe run some youth work activities or other kind of community programs and try and share their faith. So that's a good starting point. Great. And in my research then, I looked at what kind of way of life came about when they did those things, what actually happened as a result of that starting point. And I called that way of life missional pastoral care. And the reason that I did that is because I saw those elements coming together in quite a unique way, that actually they were understanding their aims as mission, but actually what they were doing often looked a lot like pastoral care, and particularly as we might understand it as enabling people to think about their lives in new ways and maybe imagine new possibilities for how their lives might move forward. So I kind of describe in the book that there's 7 elements to missional pastoral care, and they are difference, the fact that people are different from one another, the fact that they live local to one another, that they're available and spend time with each other, and that this way of life is practical as well as chat. You know, it is about talking together, but it's also about doing stuff together. that it's about long-term commitment and being consistent in that, and that it's about loving each other and coming to a place of mutual respect and care for people who are different to you, and what that kind of creates. So as we do that, as we live in ways that are shaped by those elements, it seems like that creates the possibility that both parties are changed in the living of it, really. So it's not just the kind of urban community members who get changed in the process, it's also the Christians moving in who wanted to be doing the mission. Actually, when you build these kinds of relationships, you start to see the world differently and see God differently and yourself differently, and actually maybe that is telling us something about who God is. Maybe that's part of God's mission.
Oh, very, very helpful. In what ways does this challenge the way churches in the UK do mission, particularly in the situation that we'll be coming into post-lockdown?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm no expert on lockdown. I'm going through it for the first time, like you are, and like everyone else is. I think this idea of missional pastoral care just challenges a lot of our boxy thinking that we can get into sometimes in churches. So it's easy to see mission and see pastoral care as two separate activities, isn't it? One is usually seeing mission as outward facing, about non-Christians and what we get involved in and do, and the other one is kind of about caring for Christians, pastoral care, that helping Christians to overcome life challenges. And I think missional pastoral care messes with those kinds of categories. It messes with our ideas of mission and discipleship being separate things, or the world and the church being like this stark divide between the world and the church. Missional pastoral care is about a life in the world which is infused with God and in relationship with people who may have any faith or none. So I think that's one way it challenges the church and in its mission. It's also really about justice, recognising that some parts of our society are pushed to the edges, whereas other parts of our society are dominant. And I think in this situation of lockdown, there is very much privilege and marginalisation, isn't there, in people's experience of it. If you're someone who's got consistent and good quality Wi-Fi at home, then you are at a massive advantage in this situation. Equally, the statistics coming out about how extremely people are suffering with coronavirus are showing us some of the systemic injustices in our society, that Black and minority ethnic communities are suffering worse. And we need to ask some big questions about that, about why that is and what's going wrong there. What does it tell us about who we are? And finally, I think the challenge to the way churches do mission is that in our era, it's really easy actually to just go through our lives spending time with people who are like us, to find our tribe and stick with them. And that's both in lockdown and beforehand, and probably afterwards as well. Our society makes that easy for us. And missional pastoral care is not about that. It's not like that. It's a challenge to hang out with, to build significant relationships with people who are different from you. And actually that reminds me quite a lot of like Paul's letters to the churches, when he says there is no more Jew and Gentile, slave or free, male or female. This is about difference coming together. And that was really messy in those letters, wasn't it? People got that wrong a lot. It was hard, but actually the gift was in the challenge of navigating, coming together with people who are really different from you. I think that is a key part of God's mission to all of us, really, that we don't just stick with people like us.
And you talk about Missio Dei quite a bit in your book. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how that's going to help us?
Yeah, sure. So Missio Dei is a theological idea. It's been around for centuries. And it's the idea that mission isn't just something that God does sometimes or something that God delegates to the church to do, but that mission is an integral part of God's character. So we often say God is love. And in the same vein, Missio Dei says God is also mission. And that has a couple of kind of implications, I guess, for us as churches. If we believe that God is fundamentally a missionary God, then it implies then that God is going about his mission with or without us. That whether or not we get involved, God is active in the world and doing stuff. But it also implies that if we want to follow God, to be his disciples, then that will involve following him, being on mission. And I think this kind of idea has become a lot more central to people's thinking in the church, certainly in the UK, but abroad as well, in the last 40 years or so. I think for a long time people sort of saw mission as something that kind of missionaries did, these people with a special calling who got sent usually abroad and didn't necessarily associate it with the normal everyday living as a Christian that you might do. Missio Dei reminds us that we're called to live lives of mission, that God is a reaching out God, and that to follow him at all is to follow him in reaching out and be a reaching out people.
That's really helpful. So following on from that then, how can we discern what God's doing and get involved with it?
Yeah, it's a massive question, isn't it? Discernment is a really important and careful part of our Christian lives, isn't it? And I think it's always worth starting when you're talking about discernment by acknowledging that it'll always be vulnerable to us getting it wrong. We're all human, aren't we? So I think firstly, when we're trying to discern what God is doing in any situation, we need to approach it with an open heart and an open mind and with humility. But then we come back to the same kind of process of discernment that we might use in other ways. So our sources for learning about God are the Bible, the experiences of Christians in the past, the guidance of the Holy Spirit in our present, in each of our lives. So, for example, we might look at the Bible and we might see how God works in the Bible, what kinds of things he does, who he spends time with, what are God's priorities. And then we might look around us in our communities or our families and think, where are there similar things going on? Where are people reflecting God's priorities in our neighbourhoods? So if we see in Scripture that God always seems to be on the side of the people who are poorest, then we see in our community that there's a local initiative seeking to come alongside and support people on low incomes. There's a resonance there, isn't there? So that calls our attention, says, actually, is that something that God might be doing in our community, that actually then in some way this is reflective of the character of God? It's really important that we test our discernment with others, that we're open to that kind of conversation, and that we're really self-aware about our blind spots and our prejudices as we kind of seek to follow God, because it's really easy just to go off on our own little tracks. I love Anne Lamott. She's a brilliant writer. If you've not read any of her books, I'd recommend them. But she writes, you can safely assume you've created God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people you do.
Yeah, that is really good. I'll have to look her out. Yeah. So we're in lockdown now. So it's a little bit more difficult to get into mission. How can we be part of God's mission at the minute?
Yeah, it's so weird, isn't it, this experience? And I think, well, as I say, I'm no expert. It's my first time too. What I do notice, though, as I talk to people, is that lockdown is impacting each of us really differently. It is not one experience, actually. Some people have a lot of time on their hands. Other people are busier and more frantic than ever. Some people are enjoying the time that they have on their hands, and other people are finding it really disempowering and frustrating. Some people are feeling out of control and hating it, and other people are relaxing into a different way of living. We're all different, and our circumstances are such that it means that we're all under really different pressures right now. So I think it's really important not to generalise actually about what lockdown is or isn't. And communication with our families and our neighbours and our friends has changed a lot as well, hasn't it? But I think in all of that difference, the principles of mission do hold true. Looking out for initiatives, for actions or words from others that remind you of God's character, his goodness, his kindness, that remind you a bit about Jesus, and cheer on the people doing them. Let people know, maybe, you just sounded quite a lot like Jesus when you just said that. And that's a real encouragement to somebody. And to ask God for his help in embodying the values of peace and justice and wholeness that we want to see in the world, in your own life and in your own closest relationships. Whether you're doing lockdown on your own at home, or whether you've got a household around you, there are different tensions in each of our situations, and it's not always easy. And actually seeing how we embody God's mission ourselves personally amongst the people closest to us will always be probably our biggest challenge. And where you can, I think, looking to act in your community to build shalom where you are, to build God's kingdom, sharing your life with people around you, even if that is online, and chatting to them about how you feel about lockdown and listening to their stories as well. I think sometimes as Christians we can feel like we're supposed to be the ones with the answers, and feel like we should be there to tell and to listen to other people's problems and to provide a kind of answer or solution. But the reality is we are just all in this. We're all having different experiences of it. You're no more an expert in lockdown than I am. We're all just learning, and sharing some of that is really important. That's about solidarity with others rather than just coming alongside them as someone who might give advice, which is good sometimes, but can also feel a little bit patronising sometimes too.
I really love this idea of locating God's shalom. That's been stuck in my head for the last few days, and it was in my sermon on Sunday, I think. Can you tell us some more about that?
Yeah. So I guess I often use the language of shalom to describe God's kingdom, because it is really evocative for me, really. If you think about the big picture of what God's mission is, in the life of Jesus, he's constantly announcing the kingdom is here, the kingdom is coming, the kingdom is within you. It's all about God's kingdom. And you might say God's mission is to bring his kingdom fully on earth. And in the Old Testament, God's kingdom is described as shalom, this word that means peace, that actually kind of describes a kind of peacefulness and wholeness that is about creation being peaceful and whole. That's about relationships between people and between humanity and God. It's this whole kind of beautiful, glorious, restful, gentle peacefulness. And I think locating that in our communities then is about looking for, where is peace rising up here? Where are people building one another up, overcoming their prejudices, supporting one another? It's interesting now, isn't it, in this lockdown situation, at times it can feel like there's real examples of that, people being really kind and generous and giving with one another, and reaching out to help their neighbours in a whole new way, and that is brilliant. And there's things we want to come alongside in that and cheer on. But there can also be this kind of hard edge. I don't know whether you've seen it where you are right now. I certainly have in my community. On the one hand, there's lovely posts on Facebook saying, oh, can I get some help with groceries? And someone else will say, yeah, no bother, I'll sort that out. And that's brilliant. And then someone else will chime in with this kind of hard edge of judgment. They're like, for a neighbour who isn't respecting the social distancing, or, was seen having a barbecue at the weekend or something like that. And it's like this really hard edge comes in at that point. And that's, it's quite challenging, actually. I think building shalom together means navigating our differences and being kind and generous toward one another, calling out the best in one another, naming and shaming on neighbourhood social media groups just isn't helpful, is it, to anybody? But actually having the difficult conversation with the neighbour in a kind and gentle way could actually embody shalom in that situation and bring kind of reconciliation and wholeness where there wasn't before. So I guess they're the kinds of things that I'm thinking about in relation to this at the moment.
Well, every day there seems to be talk in the paper about when's it going to end, and it will do eventually, one day. We're looking forward to that. What do you think should be our missional priorities when we do finally emerge from all of this?
Yeah, it drives me back to this idea of connection. You're right, from the beginning, God longed for connection. All of creation comes from that desire, doesn't it? God as Trinity wasn't content to just remain God as Trinity and wanted connection, and so created a world. And I think there's potential in lockdown to really begin or to continue to cultivate real connections and relationships with people in our communities through the kinds of sharing of like our stories and our vulnerabilities and our journeys of this whole pandemic craziness together, and comforting and encouraging each other, as well as exchanging practical support where we can. And I think if we are kind of noticing those opportunities and beginning those kinds of conversations and connections, then that's a foundation that will simply continue as we emerge from lockdown and we're able to spend a bit more time together. I think lockdown kind of forces us to acknowledge that connection isn't actually the same thing as talking to someone or being in the same room as someone or living next door to someone. You can do all of those things but not really connect. And actually what we're all missing, I think, is connection, and what we're having to find creative ways to make possible is connection. And I think that tells us something about who God is, that God is a God who longs for connection, and we are made in his image. And as we come out of this situation, hopefully it will give us a sharper focus on that we are beings who are built for connection with God and with one another, and how can we create that with people who are different from us, who we might long to share God's love with in a richer and deeper way.
Well, it's been really fascinating to talk these things through, and it gives me plenty to think about as I think about how we do mission. Thanks, Anna, for coming with us, and thanks for the book, and thanks SCM for putting it out just the right time when we need it. And every blessing for you in all that you're doing and your lockdown experience.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. It's been really lovely to chat to you today. Thanks for inviting me.
Pleasure. Bye.